Hi, brothers and sisters. This is Lisa, and I am not Mother Carol, but I am going to do my best to record the last 5 chapters of her book, Hannah's Heart. So bear with me. This is Chapter 11, Two Roads Diverge. Karen turned the key for the 3rd time in the ancient Volkswagen, holding it there with determination, and the engine coughed to life. She managed to coax the vehicle away from the curb and headed down to Bridge Street, hypochondrically complaining all the way. "Oh, what I wouldn't give to have my BMW back," she sighed, gripping the wheel hard now, making the slow turn up and onto the paved concrete that coated the surface of the road's namesake. Travelers' Bridge spanned about 50 feet of grassy bank and water, arching over a small tributary that ran through the woods behind her house as well as the children's school. It was the only road leading out to the main highway that connected Briggensburg to the rest of the world. All other roads wound around and in and out of pleasant-to-look-at places, but got you nowhere in particular in a hurry. It had been a game to Karen at 16, when she had first learned to drive. Head off in one direction or another, get lost, and see if she could use her senses to find her way back to the tiny little village again. Most of the time she was successful. There had been a time or two when she'd had to find a friendly face who would point her in the right direction, draw a map for her to get her out to the main route, and so back home again. She chuckled at that last thought. What my kids don't know about what life was like just a few years ago. No cell phones, no computers, no GPS. You were on your own, sink or swim. Her kids, how far away they seemed to her now. A shiver of fear ran through her at the thought. Lord, were you listening to anything I said this morning? Is there some way, some plan? You have to fix everything I've messed up. I hope you do. She drove the fearful thoughts away again and buried them under the needs of the day and her present mission, getting to work on time. Work, she scoffed. She hated this job. Hours would go by without interacting with a soul. Much of the time, the people who stopped never entered the mart. They just swiped their cards, bought the gas, and went on. Once the store had started to make money, the owners had expanded it to a 24-hour stop and found a few kids from the nearby college to fill in the overnight time she wasn't there. Apparently, they'd uncovered a gold mine, an unending stream of year-round students who were willing to work for next to nothing, find it advantageous to use their time studying instead of cleaning, sleeping instead of stocking shelves, and then quit at the end of a semester, leaving her to endure the mess of getting another one trained. There was no appeal to anything about this. She tried to fill in the time, doing over jobs that the college boys did wrong, or not at all, taking pride in keeping up with things, keeping it clean and orderly. But there was just no satisfaction here anywhere. Part of her envied the college kids' laissez-faire attitude about actually working. But then, this wasn't what they enjoyed. This wasn't their purpose in life. It was just a means to an end for them. She'd love to be able to get back to doing what she enjoyed, being creative, gardening, spending time doing little crafts with the kids, like she used to do with Hannah when she was little, making up stories and songs like her papa. Papa. What must you think of me now? Well, everything was different these days. She saw that nearly every day, selling illegal cigarettes to underage kids from some unknown place in the city because they'd stolen an ID card and postured to make her believe them. She knew they were lying, but how could she prove it? She'd never see them again anyway. They'd move on to the next town and try again. There was no joy, either, in stocking the shelves with overpriced snacks and candy bars, only to find that some young punks had driven through, and while one paid for their gas, the others were stuffing their shirts with booty. She was the only one there during the day. What could she do? Why should she even care? Only she did care, She saw the empty lives behind those shaggy heads and daring eyes. Worse, she saw what could happen to Hannah if she didn't somehow change things, fix this predicament she found herself in. The click, click, click of the concrete joints jiggled the car as she passed over each one, and a loud thump jolted through her as she hit the latest hole in the wearing pavement. Time was speeding by. A prophetic thought, indeed. Maybe now, with the time on her hands and forced to be home, she could get hold of herself again, and maybe she could cross that bridge to the children, too. Bumps, rumble stripes, potholes and all. A bright yellow detour sign met her at the far end of the bridge, pointing her to the west. She knew that road, knew it traveled for at least 5 miles before it looped around and led to the highway. She would be late, for sure. Her computerized time card was linked directly to the agency. There was no hiding a late login. She'd been warned. If she were late another time, they'd fire her. There were plenty of young kids lined up to take her place. Maybe that would be her salvation in this decision. In fact, the more she thought about it, the more her heart settled down to resolve instead of anxiety. This western road wound mostly through a small forest, and often she'd had to stop to allow a mother deer and her fawn to cross. More delays? The more the merrier, she decided. Archashavarosh stood beside an enormous oak tree. Most of its stately branches drove high up into the sky and were covered with hundreds of fine, well-lobed leaves. One, however, hung limp and ashen, not a leaf to be found on it. He drew his sword and with a powerful slash severed the damaged limb, which then tumbled to the ground. "Thank you for your great offering, friend," he spoke to the tree. "'Tis but a simple removal of a weight no longer needed, yet the Lord is grateful indeed." He flashed a smile at Shamira, saluted, and vanished. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. The words echoed in Karen's head as she drove along. Huh? Wonder if I can dig that whole thing out of my memory. She'd had to memorize the Robert Frost poem 1 year, 8th grade, if she'd remembered right, and stand to recite it before the class. She'd been terrified standing there, but she'd done it perfectly. Even received an A in elocution from the teacher. Papa had been so proud of her. He'd taken her out for pizza that night, just Karen and him. What a sweet memory. Determined now, she thought a few moments, then spoke to the windshield. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. A bend in the road at this point halted her recitation, and the car slowed to a stop. "Well, I never," she whispered out loud. Here before her lay a Y in the road. One route was the one she knew took her to Highway 224. She didn't know exactly where the other traveled. The first was the one that she'd intended to take, just to make an appearance at the store and relieve John Peters of his post as the overnight clerk. That is, until she could call the company and resign. Should she have the nerve to really do it after all? But a massive tree limb lay end to end across the entire road. There was no hope of getting around that. A fleeting thought drifted through her mind. Pay attention. He calls you. It was familiar, but very, very old. A quick swell of fear rose immediately after. It looked like this was going to happen one way or another. She was about to be jobless. What was Mike gonna do? What would he say to her? Well, she turned the wheel straight again and stepped on the accelerator. It's not like I'm making it all up or trying to be late. Even Mike has to understand that. Continuing down the road, she took up her narrative where she'd left off. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Will it? A mellower, contemplative mood was moving over her. Will it make any difference? Her frame of mind seemed to demand accompaniment, and she reached to turn on the radio. Static met every turn of the knob until it was settled on a station broadcast from the local college. A quiet voice was touting the advantages of attending classes at their newest building and a variety of choices now available. The advertisement ended, and she hoped she'd found the classical time slot. But the sudden blare of a rap song and raucous voices made her jump. She hurried to shut it off again. Guess that's out. So much for being dreamy first thing in the morning. Her fingers tapped out their jitters on the steering wheel until her heart calmed down again. This is a pleasant road, though, she mused. I wonder how far out of the way I'll be once I figure out where I'm going. She was beginning to enjoy this adventure, starting to feel her shoulders relax and the ever-present knot in her stomach ease away. As a child, road trips had been a cheap, easy way to enjoy a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The family would often pile into the enormous Studebaker left them by her grandfather, and just journey along excitedly, spotting wildlife and fine lavish houses on the way. Memory upon memory sprang up as she traveled. Grandpa would have called this a cow path for all the twists and turns in it. True, it had been many years since those jaunty days, but the road seemed completely unfamiliar. I don't ever remember coming this way before, although maybe we did, as a kid. We must have. She smiled at a fluffy cloud above her, shaped like a fat, puffy kitten. Funny how being a kid is so different from being an adult. So free, so little to worry about. Oh! Karen jerked the car to a stop. She'd no sooner rounded the last corner than the woods beside her opened up into a few acres of lush green field. Nothing surprising there, but out of the field ran children, 3 of them. The oldest might have been 6 or so, but the youngest couldn't have been more than 2. They had some sort of animal with them, chasing it around and squealing with delight at their antics. There was no adult anywhere to be seen. She pulled the car over to the side and sat watching them. They were the most beautiful children she'd ever seen, even after all the years working at the daycare. A tall boy with a messy shock of white blonde hair, a dainty, slender girl whose entire face lit up with her laughter, and the toddler, his little face was almost angelic. Concerned that they were out there all alone, she wondered if she should do something, help them, at least talk to them, make sure their parents were somewhere, perhaps where she couldn't see them from this angle. She opened the car door and turned to step out, but her foot slid on the scattered stones that were spread under her, nearly causing her to slide back, bumping her head onto the door frame in the process. Ouch! Grimacing, a second try was successful, and she turned back towards the field and the children. But they were gone. No running across the field, no lying in the grass. It was too short, and she had seen them anyway. No, they were just gone. Even the animal had disappeared. Hannah scraped her feet along in the shredded black tire mulch, slowing her motion until she finally came to a stop. She sat humped over the swing, arms looped around the chains that held it, eyes searching the ground for nothing in particular. She was bored out of her mind. She'd finished the book she'd brought along and spent some time on the sewing, enjoying the air whished by her face, closing her eyes to the sun, feeling its heat. But enough was enough. Evan loved coming to the school playground. It was a good place to spend time with him. But there was nothing here for her to do. No one but the squirrels and the bunnies ever showed up. Certainly none of the other kids from around the neighborhood came. They'd probably have better play equipments in their own backyards, she often thought. Next to her swing stood a tall wooden structure hung with black rubber tires that lay horizontal to the ground, suspended from chains. A series of narrow steps climbed up the one side, leading to a small railing, protected platform with a tent-like cover from the sun. The kids called it the fort, but the space was only big enough to hold 4 small children at best. Further away, a tall, peeling metal set of ladder rungs ran up to a dull silver slide that carried a child halfway down and then stopped, making them scoot on their bottoms to the end of the ride. On the other corner of the mulch space, a selection of cartoonish, heavy-bodied animals waved on top of thick springs, 2 feet off the ground, inviting only the youngest of children to climb on board. It was the elementary school playground, after all. The play opportunities finished with a huge sandbox, covered over and screwed shut for the summer. That was it. Well, there was also space, acres of spottily mowed grass that ran up to the edge of the woods and the boundary fence, and trees, lots of trees. The thing with Evan was he had an imagination, not just your normal spread your arms out and pretend like you're an airplane kind. The kind where imaginary friends met him everywhere he went, and he had no shame in talking out loud to them. It was embarrassing, really. Take him to one of the little stores in town just to look around? No, she'd rather sit here and watch him play. Keep him away from others that might make fun of him. Because sometimes he'd come out with the strangest things to say. In fact, lately he had been acting like one of the characters in the Narnia book, pretending Aslan was there all the time. Only Evan's name for him, from what he had excitedly told her one day, was Majesty. Sheesh. His first-grade teacher had sent notes home advising Mom and Dad of his outspoken behavior in class, and he'd acquiesced to being quiet there. But he knew Hannah wouldn't stop him, so on and on he chattered. She never really paid any attention to him, what he was saying. He was just a little kid, after all. But now she was hot and tired, and she'd had enough of the whole place. It was almost lunch anyway. Mom's note had told her to go at lunch, didn't it? She wondered if Nana would watch Evan for a while and let her escape alone upstairs to the bedroom so she could visit the garden. The note Kamali had given her this morning was still playing through her mind. She calmed down now over the book and all, and she was just itching to find out what really was happening. Jesus did say any time. I have to know what that book was about. I have to know why. Lord, please, meet with me later, at Nana's, if we can. Evan! Determined to leave, she turned to the fort area and found him sitting on the very top talking away. Evan, we need to go. In a minute, Hannah. I'm talking to Majesty. She rolled her eyes and started to relax. but then decided she just plain didn't want to wait any longer. In a bit of a huff, she stood and made her way over to the wooden steps. "No, I want to go now," she called up to him. "Mom's note said we need to go to Nana's for lunch. That's what time it is. I want to go." Evan's voice started up again, droning just below her ability to hear. "Evan, now! I mean it!" Her voice betrayed her selfish boredom. His high little voice came floating down again. This time she caught the words. "He wants to meet you, Hannah." Who? Who wants to meet me? She was a little agitated. This was a cute game, but she really didn't feel like squeezing up those stairs to the top of this thing. "Come on, Evan," she said, a little louder for emphasis this time. "The game's done now. Really. I really want to leave." Each phrase got a little quieter than the one before. "Just come down, please." She felt a wry smile curling up the side of her face. It was remarkable, really. No matter how much she was tempted, she just plain never got totally annoyed with him. Not really. It was almost like there was a never get angry with Evan switch inside that wouldn't flip, no matter the circumstance. His sandy brown, tousled hair poked up above the railing as he stood. His peaked little face appeared between the guardrails. "No, really, Hannah, he really wants to meet you. He says he has something important to tell you. Please come up." Twin sky-blue eyes coaxed her over to a tremulous smile, and her heart gave in. With a sigh, she grabbed onto the arched metal bar and began to work her way to the top. As she expected, he sat up there completely alone. How long was this going to take, anyway? The rumbly sound of tires brought Karen back out of her ponderings. A Ford pickup was making its way down the dirt road towards her. Maybe they knew what was going on here. She reached out to close her car door and stood looking directly at the driver, waving a little and hoping he'd get the hint. "Having a little trouble, ma'am." The ancient truck drew up beside her. A portly, white-haired man, his torso leaning nearly across his wife's lap, spoke out the open window. "Haven't got any tools along with me here, but I could send back some help if you'd like. We're going a mile or so up the road yet." The woman smiled up at her, nodding her head. No, I'm fine, thank you so much," Karen answered, speaking to the bottom of his face. "I'm just wondering, though. I saw some small children playing over there in the meadow a while ago. They seemed awfully young to be out here alone. I didn't see any adults or older children around, and I was a little concerned." She bent her head down a bit more, looking directly at him now. "Do you know where they might live? I'd like to at least let their parents know I'd seen them." The woman turned to look at her husband, and he sat a moment, lips pursed, eyebrows drawn together. He clucked his tongue against the roof of his mouth a few times, adjusted the ratty Stetson on his head, then looked up at her. No. There aren't any little uns around here anymore. There used to be a few years back, but the Martins sold that house, and the couple that took it never had any young uns. No." A slow shake of his head made it final. "There's no children anywhere around here. We're the nearest house in the field, and it's another 2 miles to the next one." The silent wife faced her with another shy smile, and Karen stood up straight again. "Oh," she puzzled, speaking more to herself than them. "Oh, okay, then." She stepped back away from the vehicle and gave them another little wave. "Thank you so much for stopping, then. I guess I'll just be on my way." Glad to have been such help, he nodded to her with a broad grin, put the truck in gear, and slowly pulled away. Smoke rose to greet her from the tailpipe, and dust turned up from the tires, stirring the dirt road, and she turned her head from it. She stood there, wondering, when from the corner of her eye she saw a movement up on the field again. Her head jerked up, anxious to solve this situation. The smile of the tiniest child greeted her. He was standing just up a little incline, so close Karen could see the fine strands of his hair blowing, see tiny brown freckles crossing his cheeks. His face was somehow so familiar, she felt as if she should know who he was. The little boy's smile bloomed, lighting up his entire face. He gave Karen a little kiss with one hand and blew it towards her, then disappeared again. "Okay, Squirt, what do you have to show me?" Hannah's voice preceded her face on the steps. "This better be good." "Hello, Hannah." "This better be good. Hello, Hannah Lee." A deep, growly voice spoke out of the air. At the same time, a form appeared. Both hands flew to her mouth, and she nearly fell backward again. Standing half on, half off of the tiny platform, stood an enormous male lion. 2 feet rested on the platform. His body went right through the railings, and the other 2 feet rested on thin air? Her mind flew around inside her head, searching for a logical place to land. "It's so nice of you to join us," the voice smoothed to a deep-sounding purr. "I've looked forward to meeting you for a very long time now. Adonai has told me much about you, dear one." The mighty beast's hair was unlike anything Hannah had ever seen, and for one wild moment she was reminded of Kamali's hair the first time she'd met him. His body was velvety, cinnamon brown, but there was a good deal of black in his mane as well. The inky color mingled with strands of pure gold, and then came together in a solid ruff around his entire neck. The tips of his ears stretched up over the top of Evan's head. His mouth was the size of the boy's entire face. He stood there panting slightly, his massive head cocked curiously, as though he were waiting for her to answer. This was the middle of the day, for crying out loud, right out in public. "Are you from—" was all she could manage. She'd never seen a lion smile before, but the animal's eyes seemed to laugh in delight. "I am," he answered. "I am Adonai's friend. You might say we belong together." He leaned close to her now. "Don't worry," he whispered. "No one can see me except you two." Hannah blushed, realizing they were the only ones there anyway, unless you counted the squirrels. With a roar of good-humored laugh, he shook his head like a dog shaking off water. The sun glinted off the feathery strands that framed his face, forming a halo of light for a moment. No wonder his name was Majesty. "Adonai requests, if you please, that you would meet with him again this afternoon, whenever you're ready. But if you would be so kind as to come to the gate and call for him, he would like that." He lifted his chin just a little, his message spoken, his mission completed. "Ah," as if he remembered something, he began again. This time he turned toward Evan. "I'd like to thank you for your company today. I had a pleasant time speaking with you, little one. I will be enjoying your company again soon, I am certain, and will be sure to give Adonai your requests as you have asked." Now finished, he turned and walked into the air, his body slowly fading away the further he went. Evan stood happily watching the great beast leave, then turned to Hannah with a grin. "See, I told you he had a message for you." Innocent as a dove, this was all just another happy event in his day, nothing out of the ordinary to be found here. "Broad daylight, it's broad daylight," Hannah's mind kept repeating. She reached out and took Evan's hand without a word. Slowly they made their way down the steps, one after the other, and headed across the tarmac toward the other end of the street and Nana